Welcome once again to another episode of brainsmatter, and today I've got Dr Darryl Carlton here, who is going to talk to us about artificial intelligence, and that's a topic that has been getting a lot of traction around the world lately. But firstly, what is artificial intelligence? We have seen science fiction movies, and it's a sense that it is very much like humans. What is the artificial intelligence that we see in the workplace at the moment and online?
Okay. Hello, thank you for inviting me. The AI that we're talking about today is more accurately classified as generative AI or Gen AI. What is artificial intelligence is a very big portfolio, and expert systems, neural networks, to Gen AI and a whole lot of other stuff. So Gen AI is one aspect, and it's an area of AI that has garnered a lot of interest because it is consumer facing and it is dealing with a lot of the work that we do on a day-to-day basis. It's grounded in a neural network as a core back-end topology or database that supports it. But it is itself a branch of AI that's having huge impact. What is it to us today? It's a tool that we can utilize to perform a range of tasks and activities that are leading to what is being referred to as artificial general intelligence. Now, what is meant by artificial general intelligence is, as humans, we learn things in our first 5 years of life that we don't really think about, that are not front of mind. They're not subjects that we get examined on in school. The fact that our brains are able to allow us to breathe and walk and see things happen in the background. And I know that there's this TV version of, imagine if we used 100% of our brains instead of just 10%. Well, we are using 100% of our brains, but most of the activity of our brain is on background activities that support us as living human beings. The 10% that we use for cognitive reasoning is a whole different issue. So what artificial general intelligence is trying to do is to have the ability to perform tasks that we don't think about. And that's really, really hard. So it's relatively easy in science to create an AI that will win chess. It's really bloody hard to teach it to walk.
So you mentioned the generative AI, and we've seen a lot of examples of that online at the moment. So we've got ChatGPT, which got a lot of attention, Claude from Google, and a whole bunch of others. We see Olama that people can install on their own machines and so on.
DeepSeek from China.
In terms of generative AI, what are they best used for, and what do people think they should be used for, but it isn't very practical?
Generative AI is the industrial revolution of the knowledge worker. If you go back to, and I don't know the dates of this, when did the industrial revolution happen?
It was the start of the 1800s.
1800s, with the steam engines, and the revolution at that point was replacing the manual worker. This revolution is replacing the knowledge worker. So what we're seeing with generative AI is that it is able to perform the tasks of the knowledge worker to a degree that is better than the average worker. Now, there's a couple of ways of looking at that. If we go back 40 years or so, there was an AI project called eMycin. And eMycin looked to improve the analysis of endocrinology as a medicine, as a science. The goal was not to replace doctors, but to allow the general practitioner to diagnose to a higher degree of accuracy and reliability and uplift the average doctor, average GP, to the level of a diagnostician. I don't think the goals have remarkably changed in 40 years. It's not necessarily about replacing the individual in their work, although it will actually replace a lot of people. It's mostly about enabling the average performance to be lifted to a higher level of ability by having more knowledge available to you more easily and more immediately. For example, a lot of professional jobs exist. This is going to sound a bit strange. They exist because they are gatekeepers to knowledge. A lawyer is a very good example of this. The lawyer has specific knowledge about law. Now, in principle, every one of us has access to the body of knowledge about law. We need a lawyer because they interpret the law for us. So they are a gatekeeper to that. What Gen AI is doing is it's removing that barrier for us to get access to common tasks that previously we needed specialist advice on. Now, there are other ways of doing this, and they have been around for a long time. But this is a way that everybody can get access to specialized knowledge work. But we still have to be very careful with it. I've had conversations with my medical doctor, and he hates patients that have Googled their symptoms before they come in. Well, using ChatGPT to evaluate your symptoms is just as bad, perhaps even worse. In other areas, however, it is helping and reducing costs. And I keep on coming back to law because it's one that is ripe for remediation. Do I need a lawyer to draft a simple contract? No, I don't. I can now do that with ChatGPT. I'm old enough to remember typing pools in companies that I worked in, which obviously don't exist anymore. But now I can write a letter or an email, and I can then, before I send it, I can put it into Claude or ChatGPT, and I can give it instructions to say, rewrite this so I'm not going to piss people off. So I can use the technology to improve my level of performance and to allow me to work faster. So in the same way that it used to take a week to turn around a letter in a company, so a physical letter would arrive, I would read it, I would write a response, it would go to the typing pool, it would come back, I'd edit it, it'd go back for revisions, I'd take it to my boss who would put red letters all over it, I'd take it back to the typing pool, and then we'd finally send it. So there was a week in cycling. Well, email meant that I was responding to an email from a client instantly with all of the horrors that involved. ChatGPT takes it to another level. We can now process information that much faster. It will absolutely redefine the work that gets done in most white-collar jobs.
There's a lot of fear around losing jobs, and you talked about improving knowledge work. One of the other things I've heard is that it simplifies the menial tasks, and you showed an example of an industry such as law where the gatekeepers get opened up. In terms of the type of improvements, what do you see happening for those sorts of knowledge workers that can take advantage of it?
I think it's okay. So the knowledge workers that can take advantage of it will improve their productivity and improve their value. And I think the lesson to all of us today is go and learn about these technologies, irrespective of your age. Go out and learn about them. A little known project at OpenAI was that they funded a project of a universal basic income. So Sam Altman has quite rightly said that we as a world need to have a conversation about the way that society is structured with the introduction of AI. And we need to rethink what the term unemployment means. There will be people who are permanently unemployed, and it's the wrong language, but they will never have a job as we know jobs today. Those jobs are simply going to disappear. And the move towards a universal basic income, a UBI, is one way to address this, where you say to people, be a painter, be an artist, be a musician, go and contribute in different ways, make society better. And this is sort of like the Churchill comment during World War II when his cabinet says, we need to stop spending money on arts and music, we're fighting a war. And Churchill's response was, this is why we're fighting the war. So we need to have a conversation about what society means in a world where AI is the dominant worker. And this has very serious implications for government income. If you look at the states in Australia, the largest percentage of revenue to state income, directly to state income, is from payroll tax. If workers are replaced by AI, where's the payroll tax? Bill Gates argued we need to have a robot tax. Well, the robots aren't necessarily metal objects walking around. The robots could be software objects living inside a network. And perhaps he's right, we need a robot tax to replace a payroll tax in some way. We are going to be enormously disrupted as a society by the introduction of AI. Some members of our community will benefit greatly because they will adopt it, they will implement it, they will use it, and their value will go up enormously. Others will have to find different ways of finding fulfillment, and employment isn't necessarily one of those ways of finding fulfillment.
One of the things that we hear about with large language models in particular is around their accuracy. And we have seen instances where, and examples have gone around online of certain things that are totally inaccurate. The example of models responding with eat a rock, which is obviously nonsense. So how do we know whether something that we get as a response from a chat GPT or a Claude or whatever is A, accurate, and B, you have studied this for quite a while. You did your studies in AI, you've got a PhD, you're looking at the legal side of it now. How have you seen the accuracy of large language models evolve over time?
My first AI degree I completed in 1984, so I've been doing this for a very long time. Now, what I can tell you is that large language models are inaccurate. The general models are highly inaccurate when it comes to specialized tasks. So ChatGPT, Claude, the models that are aimed at a generalized use are entirely bad when it comes to things like law or medicine or engineering. Yes, they can perform certain tasks very well, and there are some examples of them doing things, and you go, oh my God, that was really good. The hallucination rate, so errors are called hallucinations. The hallucination rate is ridiculously high in the generalized models, something well excess of 60% in ChatGPT. The problem we will face is not knowing that they hallucinated. Now, I did an experiment and I wrote a paper about this that's been published in the next couple of months for the Law Journal, where I presented a certain case to ChatGPT and it answered my questions and wrote a very nice paper for me, and it invented the examples, it invented the case law. How does this differ from what we were doing in the 1980s? Quite dramatically. So there is a technology around expert systems called backward chained reasoning, or backward chaining, where you can explain how the expert system arrived at an answer. A large language model doesn't have this ability because it is guessing what the next word is going to be. So a generative AI looks at the word that comes now. So you might say sky. It will guess that the next word is blue. So what happens is it guesses what you're going to need and assumes. So when it hallucinates and invents legal cases, as an example, it's trying to guess what you need, as compared to an expert system which would draw upon a defined knowledge base. And then an expert system would have rules with what's called Bayesian algorithm or Bayes calculus that would say this is the outcome with a certainty factor of 0.8 or whatever. Okay. You can't get reasoning out of a large language model. It cannot tell you how it arrived at a decision. This becomes incredibly problematic when we start deploying large language models into decision making. So let's say a bank built a large language model technology that assessed loan applications, and it rejects you. And you say, what the f***? Why did you reject me? Tell me how you came up with this decision. It cannot answer. And this becomes incredibly challenging and will be an issue. And we've seen this in Australia with things like robo-debt and NDIS challenges and the Banking Royal Commission. How did you arrive at this decision? So the rules that Australia is adopting, the guidelines that have been promoted in Australia have things like human in the loop. Somebody needs to assess what's happening. Has this answer been arrived at reasonably? And this is now in legislation out of the EU AI Act. And Australia has signed up with 63 other nations to the Paris Accords to say that we're going to do this. We're going to have a human in the loop, and we're going to explain the reasoning. This becomes challenging. The BBC just last week tested these large language models, and they put in a whole bunch of BBC documents, and then they interrogated the documents that they had submitted. 53% error rate in the response. So even when the model is working on known data, you can't rely on the answers. How does this impact us on a daily basis? Let's say you submit a document into a large language model, ChatGPT, Claude, whatever your choice is, and say, please summarize this. If you have not previously read that document, you cannot be certain that the summary it provides is accurate. I can guarantee it'll be well written. You don't know if it's accurate unless you have previously read the document yourself and understood it.
That's a really good point, because a lot of people don't understand that hallucination rate or the concept of hallucination in large language models. So how do we then, if you're running an organization, how would you then monitor or govern that? And this leads into a big topic which you're an expert on, which is around AI governance.
Look, the general consensus of opinion coming out of Europe at the moment, which I agree with, by the way, is you cannot segregate AI governance from data governance. So in specific terms, what that means is the European Union AI Act cannot be seen separate to its GDPR. It's all about managing the data. And I used to have this phrase, and it's an old phrase that is a variation of garbage in, garbage out. So from the beginning of computing times, we've had this concept of garbage in, garbage out. I have always referred to this as garbage in, gospel out. As, oh, it came from the computer, it must be right. And every one of us has dealt with some bureaucrat somewhere who has said, the computer says whatever. Oh, I had the extraordinary experience when I was living in Malaysia where the bank told me I was dead. For some reason, its record of me showed me as deceased. And I was standing there in front of the teller, and she said, no, the computer says you're dead. I couldn't convince her otherwise. That was the most extreme personal experience I've ever had of garbage in, gospel out. But it occurs. So if it comes from the computer, it must be right. If it comes from ChatGPT, it must be right. It's not. So we have to assume it's not before we go any further. And it requires us to evaluate what's in the document. Now, there was an example in Perth last year where a lawyer handling a divorce case generated all of his court filings from Gen AI. The judge looked at the filing and said, I don't know what this case is. The opposition lawyer said, oh, thank God, we couldn't find it either. It turned out that they were invented, they were hallucinated. What does this mean for us as individuals? It means check your homework.
What about the situation where a person is looking for some level of expertise through a large language model and they don't have the ability to check? Is it as simple as do a Google?
Well,
non-AI?
Okay, it's do they have the ability to check, or do they understand the results? Again, from personal experience, many years ago I was doing a large consulting project and I was just a contractor on this, and we were crunching very, very big numbers for a major Commonwealth agency. And the young consultant that I was working next to, who was an employee of the firm, was getting very aggravated with me because I didn't trust the Excel numbers that were coming out. I couldn't see where the problem was. I didn't know what the problem was, but the results looked wrong. And we spent a few days sorting it out, and it turned out I was correct. There was a problem we had some calculations incorrect. I always looked at this and thought, the reason I could see overall that something was wrong was because I grew up in a time where we didn't have calculators in the classroom, and I had to hand calculate all of this rubbish. And I could look at a spreadsheet, I could look at a number, and you had a feeling of whether it was right or wrong. A young person doesn't have that training. And so this colleague that I was working with, he just expected it to be right. And so he looked at the outcome of the spreadsheet differently to me.
Mm-hmm.
That's where we're going to get to with AI.
Interestingly, recently there was an article published on The Conversation, which is a website where people who have expertise in a particular topic will write an article as opposed to just a standard news outlet. And it was about whether the use of AI was making us dumber. And we've heard this type of thing before where mobile phones, and I think a lot of us can speak from experience. Before we had mobile phones, we'd remember our best friend's phone number. Now we don't even remember our parents' phone number because it's sitting in the phone. There's some research around whether people who are using a lot of these automation tools, and we're using AI as an example here, but automation in general, is causing us to rely on our own abilities less.
Look, I saw something this morning about this as well. There is significant evidence that the use of AI is making us dumb. We're relying on it. And I would say that in many ways, this is perhaps equivalent to the use of any automated tool makes us less skilled. If you go back to carpenters and artisans, plasterers, plastering used to be a highly skilled occupation, almost an art. Today you buy sheetrock from Bunnings and slap it up. Absolutely, we're less skilled. And there is a very clear research that is showing, yes, we are less skilled as a consequence of AI, and we're becoming less capable. I did read not so long ago a scientific research paper that suggested that it's possible that humans have reached the zenith of IQ, of capability, and it's all downhill from here. And looking at politicians, you'd have to say, yes, this is true. Are these tools dumbing us down? I think they are dumbing us down on tasks that we used to have to do manually. We no longer need to do that. In the same way that we're dumbed down on physical tasks where we now have equipment that allows us to do that. From dishwashing to carpentry to plastering. None of us are really very capable anymore of any of those things. But anyway, that doesn't mean we're being dumbed down entirely overall. While we have equipment, tools that allow us to be more efficient in the kitchen or in building, we become more skilled in other areas. What are those new areas going to be as we de-skill the things that AI is replacing? I don't know the answer to that. One hopes that we focus attention in other areas. Maybe they're leisure pursuits, maybe it's artistic pursuits, maybe it's creative writing, although a lot of AI is moving to creative writing. I have to say, when it comes to current version of creative writing, I think I can still tell when something has had an AI contribution to a purely human contribution. And there's some level of, wow, that's trite. It's not creative in the genuine sense.
And we see that with a lot of AI music producing platforms as well, don't we? Because as you explained earlier, in terms of generative AI, it looks for what's next based on the inputs it's had before, and it'll generate something that's expected. And so a lot of the music that comes out of these tools tend to have similar kind of patterns, whereas if you look at human creativity in terms of music, you would never have got a Bohemian Rhapsody out of an AI tool, something that is totally unexpected, or different chord changes and things like that.
I think that's probably very true. So, will AI be genuinely innovative? I think is the kernel of the question that you're posing. I don't think so at the moment. I think where we're going to use AI is in the repetitive tasks. For something that's genuinely contributing to a unique body of knowledge, I think that's still a human skill.
What excites you about where we're going with AI at the moment? We've talked about what it is, we've talked about where some of the issues might lie. What excites you about where it's going next?
It is absolutely improving productivity. I'm doing things so much faster. Tasks that used to take weeks, months, I'm doing in hours or days. So the productivity improvements with Gen AI are staggering, and that's a good thing. At the moment, the quality of those rapid tasks is quite good. Perhaps it won't be in the future, but the Gen AI is improving literally on a daily basis. What do I see as good? It's going to replace tedium and repetitive tasks. One of my favorite books, and I'd bring it out and show you, but I've packed up for moving house, is a very, very old book called Competing Against Time by Stork and Hout, who are two Boston Consulting Group consultants, and they evaluated end-to-end business process performance. And what they found in evaluating this across every industry and every company was between 95% and 99.5% of the elapsed time of a business process, no value was added. So what they were looking at is things like submitting a holiday request in your organization through the HR systems. It's a task that takes 17 seconds to approve your holiday request, but in fact it takes 2 weeks of elapsed time because it's sitting in the inbox somewhere. And this applies to every business process, applying for a bank loan, applying for a credit card, doing anything. So what we will see in the next couple of years, over the next couple of years, so we're doing it now, is we'll be implementing AI into these business processes to eliminate non-value adding time. So at things where, particularly say the public sector, where it takes months to get a new passport, most of that is non-value added. The time it takes for a migrant to have their skills assessment, 80% of the time is non-value added. It's waiting for an answer to a question, waiting for an email, waiting for a document. That waiting time will disappear. So things will move much faster. Now, we've seen this before. I remember going to Vic Road in Lygon Street back in the 70s and 80s. Yes, I'm old. And you would have to go to 5 different counters to complete one task. And if you had to go to Vic Road, you had to take a whole day off work. Now, they got rid of that entire building and they live in a small office. And there's only 3 people that work there. Not really, but you know. And the tasks get done instantly. And most of the work gets done online. We're going to take the same improvements to a whole new level of all business processes. End-to-end business processes are going to become intelligent execution.
With the rate of technology improvement, what do you think the next generation will see in terms of AI?
Oh, look, I've had this conversation with quite a few people. So I need to tell a couple of stories here. I was very fortunate growing up that I knew my great-grandmother, which is a very unusual thing. And my great-grandmother, her older sister, was the first recorded white birth in South Australia. So very old. And she passed away in her late 90s. But in her lifetime, she saw Ned Kelly hanged and Neil Armstrong walk on the moon. I have always maintained that the rate of change in my lifetime would never equal what she experienced in her lifetime. However, I think the next generation, I think my grandchildren, are going to see a rate of change equivalent to what my great-grandmother saw. And if you study, as I have, if you study the development of artificial intelligence, they have things called the AI winters, which was there was these peaks and troughs, and the troughs they refer to the AI winters. They fairly much correlate to hardware improvements. We are now on the verge of quantum computing. This along with the developments in artificial intelligence are going to change everything. I'm not smart enough to know what this is going to be. But once we have AI running on quantum, it's a very different world. How far away are we? The experts are divided on this, but perhaps it's only 5 to 10 years. And our ability to do medical research, to cure cancer, to solve the world's biggest problems, to populate Mars, which Elon Musk wants to do, or to geoengineer the world as we exist today so that we don't need to populate Mars. All of these things will be possible to a degree that we can't comprehend.
For those who want to read more about AI, you have some books, don't you?
I do. I write because I get bored. Look, I've got a whole series of books. I was inspired by, my father was a subscriber to Reader's Digest, and I think today we're even more challenged with the amount of time we have to consume information. So I've written books where I summarize research so that you can read it and consume it much faster than what everybody else has to do. I've written books about the governance challenges, the problems that we're dealing with around the world with oversight. Now, this one is a topic of great interest right now. So there is well, as J.D. Vance says, there's a new sheriff in town, and his name is Trump. And in Washington, D.C., at the federal level of the US government, they are stripping away any governance and any controls around AI. And they're saying, let it loose. The European Union is the balancing force in this, saying, yeah, well, that's a bit scary. What I think the Americans at the federal level have failed to understand and recognize is probably the biggest issue in America in any topic is states' rights. And America, more than any other democracy, is not a single entity, it's 50 states. So if you look at the legislation in Colorado, Texas, California, Oregon, Illinois, those AI regulations in the states are very, very similar to the European Union AI Act. So the Colorado legislation and the Texas legislation on AI demand control around high-risk AI, and they demand under legislation that AI systems be classified according to their risk category in exactly the same way that the EU Act does. Irrespective of what the Musk government has to say and Vice President Trump, it will come down to, I want to sell my system in Texas, or I want to sell my system to customers in California. I need to comply with states' rules and regulations. There will be controls around AI because not controlling it is scary. We only have to look at things like the Cambridge Analytica Facebook disaster to understand what can go wrong when there are no controls.
Thank you very much for your time today. That was a really interesting chat, and I would love to have you back on the show another time.
Thank you very much. It's been terrific.